It's Nick's Halloween Spooktacular.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
He's got 6 fingers on one hand. His eyes are maroon and shine red in the light. His skin is pale white and melds into the bricks of his cell. His little used voice is cold and metallic. He is Dr. Hannibal Lecter, and you've been invited into his home for dinner. So Thomas Harris first wrote about the Good Doctor in his 1981 novel Red Dragon. He'd been a reporter throughout the 70s, covering many FBI cases and documenting the procedures and what they went through. He also doesn't like to talk about himself, having not given an interview since 1976, shortly after his first novel was published. This novel was called Black Sunday and was about some criminals in the Super Bowl. You might have seen the movie, but we're not here to talk about that. No, you want to hear about the Great Red Dragon and the woman clothed in the sun, don't you? So, Red Dragon can really be considered a murder mystery novel. It's about a murderer who carefully sneaks into suburban houses at night and murders entire families. The FBI call in the help of Will Graham, an investigator who has the eerie ability to get into a killer's head. He looks at the crime scenes and decides he needs to call in more help. He goes to another criminal whose head he had gotten into, the big one, the one he had to win. He goes to see Dr. Hannibal Lecter. He consults with the good doctor, who doesn't really help him, but he does send a coded message to the killer, giving him Graham's home address. Even rooted in his cell, Lecter's influence reaches far. The novel goes on to dig into the psychology of the killer and the FBI's hunt for him. They have a big showdown at the end, the mystery gets solved, and the good guys win. Oh. Spoilers. So the real horror aspect of this is how it gets into the killer's psyche. It really explores Francis Dollarhide and how he was abused as a child and grew into a man who could commit these atrocities. He was born with a cleft palate and abandoned by his mother when he was a child and taken in by his grandmother. His grandma beat him and called him a piece of crap, which led him to chopping the heads off of animals. It makes me wonder what she did to his mother when she was a girl. Eventually, the grandmother comes down with dementia, and he reverts back to his mother's care, who continues to abuse him and gets rid of him when he starts killing more animals. Aw, little kitten. He eventually joins the army and sees the world. When he comes back, he becomes fixated on the William Blake painting, The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed in the Sun. He begins to think the painting is speaking to him, and it's telling him to kill them all. He also at one point bites a man's lips off and sets him on fire. It's deep and complex. This is contrasted with Will Graham, who's living a fairly normal, healthy family life, but finds himself wandering into the mindset of the killers. He's constantly afraid he'll slip into their dark worlds and begin targeting people himself. Okay. This fear is brought out from him by his greatest conquest.
Do you know how you caught me, Will?
Goodbye, Dr. Lecter. You can leave messages for me at the number on the
file.
You know
how you caught me? The reason you caught me, Will, is you're just alive.
And then, of course, there's Hannibal Lecter. He's really only in one scene of the book, but his presence is felt throughout. As I said, he's able to threaten Will even with nothing but a pen and paper, and they even staged an elaborate hoax to get Lecter to spill some evidence on the case. Ultimately, though, he was just a minor character in a much larger story. However, the whole atmosphere around him made him stick out. The book really wasn't that successful, however. There was a movie made in 1986 called Manhunter, and it followed it well enough, but it wasn't that big a hit either. It was remade in the early 2000s, but we'll get to that. Harris did recognize that Lecter was an underused character that had a lot of potential, so he made him the star of his next book, The Silence of the Lambs. Well, he's not really the star, but you get the idea. The main character is actually a young FBI trainee named Clarice Starling, and she's trying to make her way into the big time by arresting a serial killer who's been stalking the country. Again, we delve into the killer's mind. She goes to visit Hannibal Lecter. Did it become a rite of passage at this point? And consults him on what to do. He mocks her, but gives tantalizing clues as to how to find the killer, rather than showing her outright. This makes Lecter appear more as a real teacher, like he's invested in this girl's future. But he's also interested in her past, only giving her clues if she reveals the increasingly disturbing history of her life.
Quid pro quo. Yes or no?
As she's forced to confront herself, she's finally able to catch the murderer. Okay, so I never liked this one as much as Red Dragon. I think the main character is weak, and I think the main villain is uninteresting, and the only real advantage is the heavy presence of Hannibal Lecter, easily the most interesting character. Clarice is okay, I guess. She's supposed to be some kind of feminist icon, the kind of person who women can look up to. She takes charge and doesn't take crap from men, often shooing them out when there's no need for them. She was also played by a lesbian. There, I said it. In the book, she ends up with a guy at the end, but the movie really doesn't say. It doesn't imply either, but still. So the killer is named James Gum, and he insists on James, and is based on Ed Gein. Gein has been one of the most adapted serial killers, having inspired Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this, and numerous others. James, also known as Buffalo Bill, has been abducting young women, skinning their corpses. He's been treating the skins he collects and is trying to make clothes out of girl leather. At this point in the novel, he's kidnapped a young lady and is torturing her underground, hiding her in a well.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
This, of course, enraged many gays, transgender, and other sexual minorities who viewed it as an attack on their personal lives. It's not. It's a commentary on people who hate themselves and how they express this hatred. And then there's Dr. Lecter. The man, the myth, the madness. Lurking only in his cell and dispensing advice when it so pleases him, he is the central core of the story. A true mad genius, waiting patiently for his time to strike. We know nothing of his past, his crimes, who he is, or why he's here. And yet, we know everything about him. He's a monster with a quiet side, a living grotesque that is smart beyond reason and strong beyond all hope. He's really more of an anti-hero than a villain, and he's been cast into the public consciousness as the ultimate boogeyman, a cobra hiding in the shadows, covered in human blood and filled with a finely prepared meat. He is an icon of popular culture. The movie certainly didn't hurt. Anthony Hopkins, a tremendous British actor, played Lecter perfectly, adding a stillness and a surreal calm to the madman. He almost exudes a supernatural presence as though he's truly the devil, waiting for sin to reclaim him.
I won't waste your time or Catherine's time bargaining for petty privileges.
He definitely deserved the Oscar he got that year. Now, as for the film winning Best Picture, well, I've never thought this was some kind of great movie. It also won Best Actor, Actress, Director, and Screenplay, the third film in history to do so. I mean, it's a well-done psychological horror picture, but there's nothing about it, to me, that leaves an overall grand impression of the human condition or anything like that. It follows the book pretty well, I guess. Take out Hannibal Lecter, no, take out Anthony Hopkins, and it's really just a run-of-the-mill mystery. Of course, a lot of people say that about The Dark Knight, so what do I know? I guess there's some kind of message about feministic power in a world dominated by men, but really, I don't think this movie is as wonderful as most people make it out to be. So after this tremendous mega hit, what was Harris to do next? Well, it took him 10 long years, but he finally crafted the next book in the Lecter saga, Hannibal. I gotta say, if there were more elephants in this one, it would have been better. In this one, it deals with Lecter having escaped the insane asylum and is now living at large in Italy. Clarice has been working for the FBI for years and is suddenly blamed for a shooting that isn't her fault. This was inspired by the recent Ruby Ridge shooting that made the FBI look like a bunch of buffoons. Lecter sends her a letter of condolence and the plot gets started from there, with the FBI reopening his long-dead case around the same time one of his surviving victims wants revenge on him. This time we're introduced to Mason Verger, who is the successor to Buffalo Bill and the Red Dragon. He was a patient of Lecter's psychiatry office, who Lecter just tormented and even convinced him to cut his own face off. He tried to hang the poor bastard and succeeded in snapping his neck, but left him alive and wheelchair-ridden. His evil plan is to kidnap Lecter and feed him to a bunch of pigs. Okay, so he sucks even more than Buffalo Bill did. It's kind of cool to think of him having no face, being like a living skeleton, but he's overall very uninteresting and seems like wasted potential. It's like Lecter's going up against a monster similar to himself, evil versus evil, but there's never any real payoff to it. Clarice is back. That's nice. Then there's Lecter himself. He's his usual subtle self, but this time we get to know a little more of his backstory. He was raised in Europe and was tricked into eating his sister during the Second World War. You know how we didn't know anything about him in the previous books and that worked to his advantage? Well, no more! We get more of a sketch of who he is, and that's really the only direction Harris could have taken the character, but it's stupid. I don't care what you say, I think it's stupid. It's really a hallmark of how he shouldn't have done a sequel. Overall, I find the novel okay. It has the same realistic vibe to it, and I really like the parts in Florence, Italy, and even some of the intrigue in Washington, D.C. Harris knew how to place people in the location to make them believe they were there, even if they didn't want to be. It also had a really stupid ending. So the movie came out in 2001 and was directed by Ridley Scott. I think he did the best he could with it, directing Anthony Hopkins and Julianne Moore. Replacing Jodie Foster is always a good call in my book. It was marked by the same atmosphere he's able to imbue in all of his films. It was an okay movie, but came under a lot of controversy for one particular scene at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ray Liotta eating his own brain.
That smells great.
Yes. Let's try them, please.
I would really like some.
Granted, the rest of the movie seems to be kind of subtle and elegant, and then this shit pops up. I mean, it's no less weird than Buffalo Bill dancing if he wants to, but this destroyed the movie for so many filmgoers, and worse, it was based on something in the book. The book is even stupider. At the end, Clarice starts eating the brains with him, and the two run off and become lovers together. I like to think Harris was getting sick of Hannibal Lecter. I think he realized there was a sick cult surrounding his dark creation, and that it needed to be deconstructed. I believe he consciously made the effort to ruin his own work for the greater good, to try and dispel the rather repulsive efforts people were making about this cannibalistic serial killer. And, for all intents and purposes, he failed. Lecter is still an icon all around the world, and millions of people dress up as him for Halloween and comic book conventions, not to mention having bad impressions of him. Poor guy, I feel bad for him. Of course, if he really wanted to make an impression, he just read a more positive, less horrific novel. Or maybe he doesn't. In 2002, they remade Red Dragon, this time with Sir Hopkins, and included more of Lecter in it. I'd go so far as to say that this is the best movie, showing all the major highlights of the book while including more of the character we like. Granted, it goes a little too far, showing how Lecter got captured and taking away even more of his mystique, but at least it did it less than the next movie. In 2006, the producers wanted to do another Lecter movie. This time, they wanted it to be a full prequel, showcasing how he got his start from when he was born on up. They contacted Harris about writing the novel, and he said no. They begged him, and he still said no. It wasn't until they threatened to do it with someone else that he finally relented and agreed to write the novel just for the money. I never read it on the grounds that it's purely commercialized crap and has no business being seen. By anyone. I apologize if you're a big fan of that film, but I have better things to do. Thank you very much. So the last thing is, they've got a new Hannibal TV show going hand in hand with the Bates Motel. What do you think of that, you reclusive ass? The little bit of it I've seen I wasn't impressed with, but it seems to be striking a chord with audiences. It's definitely riding the wave of dark, gritty TV shows that's been sweeping the nation, and I think it's really more of a surrogate for people waiting to get their fix for Game of Thrones, American Horror Story, or whatever. Ugh. Branding makes me sick. One of the things that has always struck me about these books is how casual they are. The police go into a crime scene and speculate, can we hope for a suicide with this one? They treat Hannibal Lecter with reverence, but are easily able to manipulate the other killers as though that's just part of the job with them. And it is. The books really show how accustomed the police are to these tragedies, how the sight of people ripped asunder by human hands doesn't bother them, and they know their way around it. I think that's more disturbing than whatever Lecter's cooking up tonight. That what is gruesome doesn't shock people anymore, and that they just accept the gore as part of everyday life and pay it no mind. When murder ceases to be looked upon as wicked, who's to say it won't become the accepted norm?
Come on now.
Brave Clarice, you will let me know when those lambs stop screaming, won't you?
Tell me his name, Doctor.
Clarice! Your case file.